Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The stranger at the door knows my secrets. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Unwelcome Visitor. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows of Sarah's modest suburban home. Outside, the night was unforgiving. A storm had settled in, casting deep shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Rain pounded relentlessly against the roof, a constant drumbeat that seemed to sync with the rising anxiety in Sarah's chest. Sarah sat in her living room, trying to lose herself in the flickering light of the television, but her mind kept drifting. She had worked hard to build a life of routine and normalcy, a life that anyone passing by would assume was ordinary. Yet, beneath the surface, she harbored secrets she had buried deep, hoping they would never resurface. The clock struck midnight, and, as if on cue, a loud knock echoed through the house, shattering the fragile peace. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. No one ever visited at this hour, especially not in a storm like this. She stared at the door, half expecting the knock to be a figment of her imagination. But there was again 3 deliberate, ominous knocks. She hesitated, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Slowly, she approached the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. With a deep breath, she pulled it open. A stranger stood on her porch, drenched from the rain but smiling as if he didn't notice the storm. His eyes were sharp, penetrating, as if he could see right through her. The unsettling confidence in his posture made Sarah instinctively step back. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked her over, as though weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice smooth, yet laced with something dark. "Sarah, isn't it? It's been a long time." Her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen this man before, yet he spoke her name with familiarity. "Do I know you?" The stranger's smile widened. "Oh, we go way back, farther than you'd care to remember." A chill ran down her spine. How did he know her name? What did he mean? Her pulse quickened, fear gnawing at her resolve. Before she could respond, the stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered envelope. He held it out to her, his expression unreadable. "I'll be seeing you again, Sarah." With that, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway, the envelope heavy in her hand. The storm outside raged on, but it was nothing compared to the storm now brewing inside her. As she closed the door, her world shifted. Whatever secrets she thought were safe had just been unearthed. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The envelope felt heavy in Sarah's trembling hands, as though it carried the weight of her entire past within its worn paper. She stood in the foyer. The door closed behind her, shutting out the storm, but not the dread that clung to her like a second skin. Her mind raced, thoughts colliding like waves in a turbulent sea. Who was that man, and how did he know her name? She slowly opened the envelope, her fingers unsteady. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink smudged but legible, as if written in haste. As she read the words, her breath caught in her throat. "You thought you could bury the past, Sarah, but the truth always finds its way to the surface." Beneath the message was a date she had tried so hard to forget. The memory of that night flooded back, sharp and vivid, like a blade slicing through the carefully woven fabric of her new life. She dropped the letter as if it had burned her, the paper fluttering to the floor like a fallen leaf. Panic surged through her veins. She hadn't thought about that night in years. No one knew what happened, No one could know. She had made sure of it. But now, someone did, and they were intent on reminding her. Over the next few days, Sarah's world began to unravel. The stranger returned, always at night, always with that same unnerving smile. Each time, he revealed another piece of her past, a secret she had locked away in the darkest corners of her mind. His knowledge was disturbingly precise, details that only someone who had been there could know. Her paranoia grew with each visit. She found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, convinced she was being watched. The once peaceful neighborhood now felt suffocating, every shadow a potential threat. She tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but it was cracking under the pressure. She became jittery, her nerves frayed. Small talk with neighbors became unbearable. Every innocent question felt like an interrogation. Sarah started to have flashbacks, memories she had repressed for so long that they now felt like someone else's life. She saw the faces of those she had hurt, the mistakes she had made, and the one decision that changed everything. The flashbacks hit her at random, paralyzing her with guilt and fear. It was as if the stranger's words had opened a door in her mind she had desperately tried to keep locked. She attempted to ignore the stranger, convincing herself that he was just a figment of her imagination, a product of her guilt. But every time she tried to dismiss him, he returned, more determined, more menacing. His words cut deeper, his presence more ominous. It was clear that he wasn't going away. The psychological noose tightened, each encounter leaving her more unhinged. Her behavior became erratic, and those close to her started to notice. Friends reached out, concerned, but she pushed them away. How could she explain the stranger, the secrets he knew? She was too afraid to confide in anyone, too afraid that the truth would finally destroy her. Even her family, the one anchor in her life, seemed distant now. They couldn't understand the terror that gripped her, the guilt that consumed her every waking moment. Sarah was spiraling, her life slipping through her fingers like sand. The stranger had become a specter, haunting her every step, unraveling the life she had fought so hard to build. The past she had tried to escape was closing in, and there was nowhere left to hide. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the bathroom mirror, pale and drawn, eyes wide with fear. The shadows under her eyes had deepened, a stark reminder of the sleepless nights that had become her new reality. Every sound made her jump. Every creak in the floorboards sent her heart racing. The stranger's relentless visits had worn her down to the bone, and she knew she was on the brink of breaking. That night, he had been waiting for her again, as if he knew she would come to the door, unable to resist the pull of his presence. He had smiled that same unsettling smile, and this time, he spoke of something she had never expected him to know. "Do you remember the summer of '9, Sarah?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, but the words were like knives. "The car crash on Route 16? Sarah felt the air leave her lungs, as if she'd been punched in the gut. Her mind reeled, flashing back to that fateful night. She had been out with friends, drinking more than she should have. The rain had come out of nowhere, blurring her vision as she drove too fast down the slick highway. She had seen the headlights just before the impact, felt the crunch of metal against metal, and then nothing. She had woken up in the hospital with minor injuries, but the other driver hadn't been so lucky. The police said it was an accident, that the rain and the winding road were to blame. But Sarah knew better. She had buried that night, refusing to acknowledge her role in it, even to herself. She had moved on, built a new life, tried to forget. But the stranger hadn't forgotten. His words brought the memories crashing back with brutal clarity. She could still hear the screeching tires, the shattering glass, the silence that followed. And now, he was using it against her, peeling back the layers of her carefully constructed facade. Desperation clawed at her. She couldn't let him destroy everything she had built. She had to find out who he was, how he knew so much, and, most importantly, how to stop him. The next day, Sarah started making calls, reaching out to people she hadn't spoken to in years. She needed answers, but every lead was a dead end. No one had heard of the stranger. No one had experienced anything like what she was going through. It was as if he existed solely to torment her. She even drove back to the site of the crash, hoping to find some clue, something she had missed. But the road was quiet, the memories even more so. She stood by the guardrail where the accident had happened, the wind whipping through her hair, and felt the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. The past was a shadow she could never escape, and the stranger knew that. When she returned home that evening, exhausted and empty, he was waiting for her again. This time, he didn't speak. He simply handed her a photograph, a grainy, black and white image of the crash site, with a single word scrawled across the back: soon. Panic gripped her. She couldn't keep living like this. The stranger was always one step ahead, anticipating her every move. She felt trapped, like a mouse in a maze with no way out. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, but deep down, she knew there was no running from the past. It would follow her, no matter where she went. As she stared at the photograph, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if the only way to end this was to confront the stranger directly, to do whatever it took, no matter the cost, to silence him once and for all? But could she do it? Could she cross that line again, this time with purpose? The question lingered, unanswered, as she sank into the darkness of her thoughts, the photograph still clutched in her trembling hand. Chapter 4. The cracks widen. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her world was unraveling, thread by thread. She sat in her living room, the photograph still clutched in her hand, staring at it as if it held all the answers. But there were no answers, only more questions. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred, and she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The days that followed were a haze of distorted perceptions and fleeting shadows. She found herself questioning everything, every creak of the house, every flicker of light, every face she passed on the street. Was it the stranger, watching her, waiting to strike? Or was it just her fraying mind, conjuring horrors from the depths of her guilt? Her friends noticed the change. They whispered when they thought she wasn't listening, exchanged worried glances when she walked into the room. They tried to reach out, offering support, but she pushed them away. How could they understand what she was going through? How could they possibly comprehend the terror that had taken root in her life? She saw their concern as betrayal, convinced they were somehow involved, that the stranger had gotten to them too. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Sarah made up her mind. She couldn't continue like this, living in fear, doubting her own sanity. She had to confront the stranger, demand to know what he wanted, and put an end to this nightmare. She waited by the door, heart pounding in her chest, until she heard the familiar knock. When she opened the door, there he stood, the same unsettling smile on his face. His presence seemed to suck the warmth out of the room, leaving only a cold void. "What do you want from me?" Sarah's voice trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall, to hold her ground. "Why are you doing this?" The stranger's smile widened, his eyes dark and unreadable. "It's not about what I want, Sarah. It's about what you deserve." His words sent a chill down her spine, but she refused to back down. "You want money? I'll pay you. Just leave me alone." He chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "It's not about money, either. This is about punishment, Sarah. You can't escape your sins forever." In a moment of desperation, she lunged at him, shoving him back against the doorframe. But he didn't react as a normal person would. Instead, he remained eerily calm, his smile never wavering. His eyes bore into hers, filled with a knowing that defied explanation. "Do you think you can stop me?" he whispered, his voice dripping with menace. "I know everything about you, Sarah. Every lie, every secret. You can't run from the past." Sarah recoiled, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was losing control, her grip on reality slipping through her fingers like sand. She could feel it. This wasn't just a man tormenting her. There was something else, something otherworldly, something that defied logic and reason. The stranger leaned in close, his voice a cold whisper in her ear. "This is only the beginning." As he stepped back into the night, leaving Sarah alone in the darkness, the realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about her past. It wasn't just a game or a cruel joke. It was something far more sinister, and she was caught in its grip with no way out. She stood there, trembling, as the storm outside mirrored the tempest within her mind. The cracks in her reality had widened, and there was no way to seal them shut. The descent into madness had begun, and she was powerless to stop it. Chapter 5: Descent into Madness. The days blurred together as Sarah spiraled deeper into paranoia. The stranger's presence was everywhere, an ever-present shadow that loomed over her life. She felt his eyes on her at all times, in every corner of her home, every reflection in a mirror, and every passerby on the street. It didn't matter where she went or what she did. She was certain he was watching. The once comforting confines of her home had transformed into a prison. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind, a reminder that she was never alone. She took to closing all the blinds, locking every door, and unplugging electronic devices, convinced they were avenues for the stranger to spy on her. Her world shrank to the size of her living room, where she sat for hours, staring at the front door, waiting for the next knock. Her work suffered first. She stopped answering calls and emails, too paranoid to communicate with the outside world. The projects she had meticulously built her career on began to crumble, her reputation along with them. Her boss reached out, concerned about her absence, but Sarah could only hear the stranger's voice in the concern of others, twisting their words into threats. She cut ties, ignoring their pleas for her to return to normalcy, convinced they were in league with him. The paranoia seeped into her personal life next. Friends and family, once her anchors, became suspects in her mind. A glance too long, a question too probing, and she would lash out, accusing them of betrayal. One by one, they fell away, distancing themselves from her erratic behavior, until Sarah was left completely alone. The stranger, however, grew bolder. The supernatural occurrences that had started as small, unsettling events became impossible to ignore. She would find objects moved from their places, her furniture rearranged as if by invisible hands. At night, she heard voices low, malevolent whispers that filled her with a primal dread. The lights would flicker and die, plunging her into darkness, where she would feel the stranger's presence most acutely, as if he were standing right beside her, breathing down her neck. In a fit of desperation, she tried to confront him once more, but this time, she armed herself a kitchen knife clutched in her trembling hand. She stalked through her house, calling out for him to show himself, to end the torment. But the stranger didn't appear. Instead, the house itself seemed to mock her, with every shadow twisting into his shape, every sound echoing his laughter. The clues she had pieced together about his identity only deepened the mystery. A photograph she found in a drawer, an old letter she had forgotten about each item, seemed connected to the stranger in ways she couldn't fully understand. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to piece it together, the truth remained just out of reach, taunting her. By the end of the week, Sarah was a shell of herself. She had driven everyone away. Her professional life was in ruins, and her home had become a twisted reflection of her fractured mind. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air thick with the smell of fear. She was utterly alone, left to face the stranger and the horrors he had unleashed on her life. And as she sat in the darkness, knife still in hand, she realized the most terrifying truth of all. There was no escaping him, because the stranger wasn't just outside, lurking in the shadows. He was inside her mind, pulling the strings of her unraveling sanity. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Sarah sat in the dim light of her living room, the silence around her almost palpable. The supernatural disturbances had reached a fever pitch, leaving her isolated and terrified. Her mind, already frayed, was racing with desperation and fear. But amidst the chaos, a single, nagging thought persisted. There had to be a reason, a truth behind the stranger's relentless torment. As she rifled through her attic, searching for anything that might give her a clue, she stumbled upon an old, dust-covered trunk. Her hands shook as she pried it open, revealing a collection of yellowed letters and old photographs. The trunk was filled with remnants of her past. She had long forgotten mementos of a life she had buried beneath layers of denial. Among the items, a single photograph caught her eye. It was a faded image of a group of people at a summer barbecue, their faces jovial and carefree. But as she studied it closer, she froze. One face in the background, half hidden by shadows, was unmistakably familiar. It was the stranger. Her breath caught in her throat as she pulled out an old, crumpled letter that had been tucked behind the photograph. The letter was addressed to her, written in a handwriting that sent shivers down her spine. It was dated from years ago, just after the accident that had changed her life. The writer spoke of betrayal, of justice yet to be served, and of a life taken too soon. It was then that the horrifying realization hit her. The stranger was connected to the accident in a way she had never imagined. He was the brother of the man who had died that night. The letter revealed his desire for revenge, his quest for justice that had turned into a relentless pursuit of her own soul. The stranger wasn't just a man. He was a vengeful spirit, driven by an unresolved grudge, the embodiment of the guilt she had tried to bury. The truth was far more terrifying than she had ever anticipated. The stranger's motives were not merely about her past mistakes, but about her very essence, a quest for retribution that transcended the mortal plane. The guilt she had felt for years was manifesting in this supernatural entity, feeding on her every fear and regret. As the full weight of her realization sank in, Sarah felt a profound shift within herself. The man she had wronged, the lives she had affected, were now glaringly real, not just fragments of a troubled conscience. She understood now that she couldn't just run from this. She had to confront her past, face the stranger, and seek some form of closure. With renewed resolve, Sarah decided to face the stranger one last time. She knew it wouldn't be easy and that it might cost her everything, but she had to confront him to finally bring this torment to an end. The time for running was over. It was time to face her demons head-on and settle the score once and for all. As she prepared herself for the climactic confrontation, the line between justice and vengeance became painfully clear. The stranger's wrath had been fueled by her deepest secrets, but now she was ready to confront the very essence of her guilt and seek a resolution to the darkness that had consumed her life. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she approached the old, dilapidated warehouse, the site of her past sins, the place where her life had irrevocably changed. It was a symbol of everything she had tried to forget, now standing as the backdrop for her final confrontation with the stranger. The sky above was a bruised purple, and the storm that had been threatening all night finally unleashed its fury, casting an eerie glow over the abandoned building. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The wooden floors creaked under Sarah's weight as she made her way through the shadows, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. The stranger was waiting for her in the center of the warehouse, illuminated by a single beam of moonlight that streamed through a broken window. His eyes glinted with a cold, malevolent light, and his smile was as chilling as ever. "So, you've come," he said, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "I was beginning to think you'd given up." Sarah clenched her fists, feeling the weight of her past mistakes pressing down on her shoulders. "This ends tonight," she declared, her voice trembling but resolute. "You've taken everything from me. I'm here to face you." The stranger's laughter reverberated through the warehouse. "Taken everything? No, Sarah. I've only just begun. You've buried so much guilt and regret, but tonight I'll unearth every last bit." As he spoke, he began to recount her darkest secrets, details of the accident, the people she had hurt, the lies she had lived. Each revelation felt like a knife twisting in her chest, forcing her to relive every painful moment. The psychological torment was relentless, and Sarah found herself struggling not only against the stranger, but also against her own memories, her own fears. The battle between them was both physical and mental. Sarah lunged at the stranger, her hands gripping a heavy metal pipe she had found earlier. She swung it with all her might, but he dodged effortlessly, his form almost shifting with the shadows. His attacks were not just physical, they were psychological, aimed at breaking her spirit. He taunted her with accusations, trying to make her doubt her own sanity. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah faced a choice that would determine her fate. The stranger offered her a final bargain: give in to the darkness and let her guilt consume her, or confront it and seek redemption. It was a choice between damnation and salvation, a decision that would seal her fate. Desperation drove Sarah to make a choice. With a cry of defiance, she threw the metal pipe aside and faced the stranger head-on, her eyes blazing with determination. "I choose to confront my past, to seek redemption. I won't let you control me any longer." Climax of the battle was intense, a chaotic clash of wills and emotions. Sarah fought with everything she had, not just against the stranger, but against the weight of her own guilt. In a final, desperate move, she reached deep into herself, confronting the deepest parts of her soul. She faced her regrets, her pain, and her fear, using them as fuel to overcome the stranger's malevolence. As the stranger's form began to waver, his power diminishing, Sarah felt a sense of liberation. She had faced her demons and made the choice to reclaim her life. The storm outside raged on, but within the warehouse, the air began to clear, leaving Sarah standing alone, victorious but exhausted. The stranger's form dissolved into the shadows, leaving Sarah to confront the aftermath of her battle. She had won, but the scars of her past would remain. Yet, as she stepped out into the stormy night, she felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to find peace. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Sarah stood alone in the abandoned warehouse, her breath visible in the cold air, mingling with the dust and debris. The stranger's form had vanished, but the echoes of his malevolent presence seemed to linger. The oppressive weight of the past and the battle she had just endured hung over her like a shroud. Sarah's body ached, her mind racing through the aftermath of the confrontation. The warehouse, once a symbol of her darkest fears, now seemed almost serene in its desolation. She stumbled out into the night, the cold rain washing over her, mixing with her tears. Every step she took was a reminder of the toll the past had taken on her. As she walked through the empty streets, the oppressive quiet was broken only by the occasional distant rumble of thunder. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at her. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, but she needed to see something familiar, something that would ground her in reality. Reaching her home, Sarah found it eerily calm. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside, the warmth of the interior contrasting sharply with the chill of the night. Everything was as she had left it, familiar, yet profoundly changed. Her house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The psychological impact of her ordeal began to settle in. She had survived, but the emotional and mental scars ran deep. Her nightmares were filled with fragmented memories of the stranger's relentless torment and her own haunted past. The confrontation had left her with a fragile sense of peace, but the shadow of her past actions loomed large. As Sarah sat down, attempting to find solace, the phone rang a sharp, jarring sound that pierced the quiet of the night. Her heart raced as she picked up the receiver, her hand trembling. A chilling silence on the other end was broken by a soft, familiar voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "You thought it was over." The voice was unmistakable. It was the stranger's. Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened to the voice speak of unfinished business, of the lingering consequences of her choices. The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The last traces of her nightmare seemed to creep back into her reality. Had the stranger truly been defeated, or was this just the beginning of a new torment? Sarah's heart pounded as she scanned the room, her eyes falling on a strange new note resting on her coffee table. She approached it cautiously and unfolded it. The note was a cryptic message, written in the same chilling handwriting as before. The past never truly lets go. Cold breeze swept through the room, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The sense of closure she had hoped for was replaced by a haunting realization that the shadows of her past might never fully recede. As she looked around her now empty house, Sarah felt an unsettling mixture of relief and dread. The confrontation with the stranger had been only a chapter in her story, a story that was far from over. The lingering sense of horror and the unsettling twist left her with one haunting truth. The ghosts of her past might never truly leave her, and the darkness she faced tonight was only a prelude to the ongoing battle within herself. In the end, Sarah was left with the stark realization that while she might have faced her demons, the echoes of the past were far from finished with her. The final twist of her ordeal left her in a state of uneasy anticipation, wondering what the future might hold in the ever-present shadow of her own guilt.